Hi, everybody. I am Andrew Starks, Director of Product Management at Manica. I'm also a member of the Ames Board of Directors and a proud participant of the Pro AV Working Group. And I'm really honored to be speaking at Oktoberfest on behalf of that group and also IPMX and the work happening in a lot of different standards bodies, a few of which we'll kind of touch on a bit today. Let's see if I can make PowerPoint work here. First, just a touch about Ames. Ames is a nonprofit organization that believes in promoting the benefits of open standards to broadcasters since we were founded, and in Pro AV for about, I think, 5 years now or so, although that history might need to be corrected. Again, we are a nonprofit organization that's open to everyone. So to put a finer point on that, Ames is not controlled by any single vendor, and in fact relies 100% on its members for its funding. So we've joined together for a common goal, which stated more formally, is to foster the adoption of one set of common, ubiquitous, standards-based protocols for interoperability over IP in the media, entertainment, and Pro AV industries. Now, there's a lot packed into that sentence, and in multiple ways, it really comes down to making the technology foundation of our industry, audio and video, and how we identify and move it around, something that is possible to do on really any vendor's equipment. And so to illustrate the needs and the benefits of this goal, I thought I would have some fun today and briefly look at some of the historical waves within both Pro AV and broadcast, audio and video transport technology specifically. And our starting point really could go all the way back to Pro AV's film era, actually, which arguably began in the 1930s with educational films, like the classic American civil defense movie, Duck and Cover, or driver's education scare flicks like The Iron Graveyard. And then there's also the personal character builders, such as Watch It, Your Manners Are Showing. That's for you, Sean. So it'd be valid to start here, as these films really were part of the Pro AV history, and SMPTE was a part of that, actually, contributing standards like the ones listed here, which are just a few of the more than 30 that were part of making 16mm films interoperable. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have clicked the right there. I didn't click, sorry. So there's the standards and there's the film projector. So for this presentation, I want to use an economic model to present 3 modern eras of Pro AV, and I'll leave out film to start instead with analog audio and video, and then digital AV, and then AV over IP. And to do this, we're going to use something called the Kondratiev wave to illustrate these transitions. Named after Nikolai Kondratiev in 1925, he observed that economies undergo cycles that are closely tied to technology. So as an macroeconomic theory, it's a little suspect, but for what we're doing here today, it'll serve us just fine, and it has a lot to say about technology cycles within markets like ours. So the graph is really simple. It's just vertically, you kind of measure progress, and there's no math, which makes it a true economic theory. And along the horizontal axis, you've got time. In this example, we see water power to steam power to electric power, and the results overlap. And that's kind of the key thing there. The incumbent technology remains superior for a time while the new technology matures, hits a plateau, and then it's replaced by still newer technology. So we want to look a little bit more at these gaps because they're worth exploring. Broadly speaking, the existing technology is most comfortable to the incumbents. Everything within their world is set up to be successful with it because everything's already there for them. Training, production equipment, supply chains, sales channels, everything is set up for incumbents to really ride this wave out until it's completely dead. For the proponents, they've got a vision. They can see what's coming. They believe in the need. They have a high value problem to solve for customers with bags of money, and they want to do this right now. So that kind of taking just a closer look at this gap here, provided the technology shift actually takes hold, so the new technology is legitimate, this situation would create something called the innovator's dilemma. And that is a situation where, well, actually detailed in Clayton Christensen's 1997 book, which is worth reading if you have a chance, if you haven't read it yet. But the short version of it is that new technologies come on the scene, and then incumbent technology's long-term success really depends on them doing some short-term stupid things. So for example, Kodak actually developed the very first digital camera back in 1973, and they only, after developing it and proving it out, decided to immediately kill it because it made absolutely no sense for them to obsolete the revenue they were getting from film, which of course is what their business was built on. When pressure became too much later on, as the technology developed in the 90s, they kind of half-heartedly sold digital cameras for a while and were eventually run over by the rest of the industry, especially Canon and Nikon, who really didn't have a film business to care about. A happier example of this would be just to look at Microsoft's history and their ability to reinvent themselves over the last 40 years as really wave after wave of market disruption upended what they were doing. But just kind of looking at this a little more and breaking it out here, you can kind of look at it as kind of stages, right? So the first stage of like a transition to a new technology is really kind of like a science project with a lot of venture capital hype. And the incumbents really at this point are kind of more amused, a little bit curious, and some of them that know what's going on have got a lot more fear and loathing as they kind of look at their current business models, shelf life, getting closer to expiration. In the next stage, though, the technology really starts to work and the incumbents can see the benefits, they kind of join in. And because of path dependency and market familiarity, the new solutions end up looking like poor quality versions of the old solutions, and with less reliability. But as time goes on and people figure things out, reliability increases, killer apps get discovered, and now the new technology starts to really make the old technology look old. So if the product that we're talking about is a transport standard or some other kind of infrastructure technology upon which really the rest of the industry is built on, then there is market confusion and interoperability is lost. So there's kind of a stunted growth situation, and that creates customer frustration. And in that case, the next stage is going to be the pseudo standards or the closed standards. And this is where companies that really have a handle on this and they're looking to kind of build a new business out of the new technology, create a licensing system or some kind of closed consortium to capture the market with some kind of implementation or license agreement that allows them to provide technology to the rest of the industry. Examples of this kind of include VHS. Actually, I shouldn't have put VHS on here. Betacam would have been a better example, or Beta, I'm sorry, would have been a better example. HDMI, HD-based-T, and SDVOE are certainly examples of a closed standard that requires licensing. With these licensing terms, they may differ. There may not be any money involved, but the bottom line is that ultimate control of the technology sort of remains with the inventor, and that's what makes it a closed standard, or we call it a pseudo standard because it really doesn't go through a standards process, which is a other part of standards. But sometimes this works out really well for everyone. And it has to be said that there's been a lot of success with this, especially HDMI and in Pro AV, HD-based-T has certainly been very successful. In the broadcast and IT industries, however, these are rarely accepted because as multi-vendor open standards with multiple tested interoperable implementations come around, they just have way too many benefits to ignore when the market is big enough or when the stakes are high enough. So once an open standard that meets the market's needs, and that's a real key thing because we certainly see some some examples of where that hasn't happened. But when that does happen, the industry will demand it. And I am really unaware of any exception to this rule. So I think of Nobel NetWare in the 80s and then TCP/IP. While Nobel survived that transition for a while, their proprietary protocol IPMX did not. So this is a Kondratiev wave that I made up for our industry. This is my little art project. The illustrated waves include analog AV over baseband, then digital AV over baseband, and then finally AV over IP. We are going to start with analog over AV. So this is where modern Pro AV really starts to begin because it marks the beginning of Pro AV systems. And even though standardized television had been around since 1941, it wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s that video usage in Pro AV really started to take hold, thanks in part to more affordable cameras and standardized tape formats like 3/4 inch and JVC's VHS, both of which did become open standards. Still, film continued to dominate because for larger audiences, it was much higher quality, and really LCD projectors didn't come around until 1988, and they weren't all that awesome for interlaced video. So there was this gap. Newer technology, video, was somewhat behind film, but it had unique advantages, and steady advancement kept it relevant. If I had that film wave here, you'd see the gap there. In these early days, video in Pro AV was essentially a cost-reduced variant of the technology used in broadcast. I want to highlight this point here, stepping away from the wave for just a minute. So the point is that chances are, in the beginning, if you had video, your device would work on any monitor that you could find within your region, because it was regional, with cheap conversion if you didn't have quite the right connector, right? And the same story was kind of true for audio as well. But eventually this kind of happy scene sort of broke apart, and that's when computers really kind of came in, right? So now we have what we understood as video, and then we had this kind of other thing, which was computer graphics. A lot of it was incompatible with each other, with EGA and CGA and VGA kind of all doing their own thing. SVGA was an extension of VGA, so that kind of worked out, and then a bunch of other lesser known extensions. But at first, computers really had crude graphics of low resolutions, but they kind of quickly caught up, and if not in frame rate, at least in crispness and in resolution, they eventually even overtook traditional video. And this really fit the bill for professionals who are showing spreadsheets, small text. And so computer graphics really became a huge part of the Pro AV scene. And also with this expanding power and flexibility, video and audio technology innovation happened really a lot more quickly than was possible in broadcast, which, to their credit, had to support a limited amount of over-air bandwidth, and also every single television going back to the 1940s. So people began to produce and watch animated and natural content on the computers, but apart from specialized applications and hardware that was made for broadcast production and the glorious Commodore Amiga in all its gen-lockable glory, computers, video graphics were kind of disconnected from the monitors that you'd watch it on. So that's the important bit I want to kind of highlight here, that computer content was uncoupled from the monitor. So video, what you did on your computer, was running asynchronously. So you might have like a flash animation running at 12 frames a second. You might have, your video game running at 200 frames a second, but the computer's display was always at that 30 or 60 frames a second. And today we have, 144 and other weird or oddball frame rates as well. But buffering and tearing made it work. So we might call this kind of video internally synchronized, asynchronous video, or maybe multimedia is the right term. But either way, it's worth noting this island of video now as we consider the implications of convergence that we're facing today. So end of analog innovation really kind of happens right around the early 90s. I mean, it wasn't as easy to maintain quality over long distances or through processing equipment, needed a lot more bandwidth compared to compressed digital. And like we said, computers had some high resolutions, but for broadcasters, moving to high definition was not really possible, except for Sony. And I just mentioned it because it's kind of cool. Sony had a system called Muse, which was kind of an interesting story, but it was short-lived and largely marked the end of analog innovation. But if you want to read something cool about a neat slice of history, look up Muse. So this brings us to digital. The move didn't happen all at once. I'm going to fly through all of this because we sort of know this history a little bit better. We know that broadcast, adopted SDI and became the dominant standard. And now, perfect in quotes quality and repeatability were possible. Newer versions of SDI, all of which were backward compatible, could be used and could use the same cheap and durable connector, roughly the same cable, and support all the way up to UHD resolutions. For Pro AV, the story was a lot muddier. SDI was not a great fit and a little bit too expensive for them in most applications. And also there was plenty of analog standard definition gear around. So really, digital transport was confined mostly to like FireWire connections, and even DVD players used analog connections for video. But when high definition video came around, Pro AV was quick to adopt it for boardrooms and digital signage especially. But it had to settle with the consumer world's transport options. So at first, that meant DVI HDMI and DisplayPort, which did the job, but were really a rented suit for the Pro AV integrator. Cables were expensive, impossible to terminate in the field, and had limited length. And eventually, active and passive baluns came around, and then we mentioned HD-Base-T, which became kind of a closed standard that solved a lot of these cable issues. So before we jump into AV over IP, I want to touch on one more weird observation related to computers, and that is this kind of shadow wave here. So long before AV over IP, computers have been streaming video, right? And to represent activity, let's put this shadow wave here, and to capture it, you can kind of see some of the standards here along. And again, this is not an exhaustive list here. But some of these standards that are listed strive for, very good latency, others not so much. But great latency in this world really is sub-second, not like what you would use for driving your KVM monitor. Although RTP, is part of that scene, and that of course became the basis for a lot of different standards, including IPMX and SMPTE 2110. As well as other standards out there. But overall, these technologies are not really meant to replace the baseband analog or digital signal. So that's why I kind of call them a shadow wave. They weren't part of the transport picture or live production systems, really. They were more designed to solve problems between computers. So you might call these over the top or OTT, but we really reserve that term for modern streaming services. But again, I kind of bring that into this conversation mainly to highlight the fact that we're all doing the same thing. So, adding AV over IP, we can really see two things here. The first is that we're still in the gap, where most people are relying on baseband digital in at least part of their system. And in Pro AV, there's really no monitors or projectors that directly support an AV over IP closed standard natively or open standard. So there are a handful of cameras, mostly borrowed from the security world, that support UDP streams with relatively high latency H.264. And there might be some advanced options out there that I'm missing, but it remains true to say that baseband continues to play kind of a dominant role especially in Pro AV. Increasingly in broadcast, we're seeing more and more IP video though. The second thing we notice is that this graphic is super crowded. So let's zoom in a little bit. And I just kind of want to wind down here and take a look at where we're at. So today we are at the big arrow, and broadcast and Pro AV are migrating to the same platform, common off-the-shelf computers and IP networks. So our industries, and most importantly, our customers, have fully embraced software and also IP technology and the cloud as the backbone for their information systems. So they would like to treat video like any other data on their network, and they want to define it and deploy it, their systems with it. So as we continue to work on IPMX and to follow this roadmap, as of the end of September 2021, we can say that the majority of the core work has already been completed, and that's thanks to the foundation of AES 67s, ST2110, and MMOS. Also, though, we can say that the core interoperability standards required in Pro AV are quickly advancing, and some of them are actually nearing completion, which John was just talking about earlier. And some of the upcoming presentations will share that progress as well. So as we advance, though, we can look forward into the more into the next steps or the steps after the ones we're taking right now. And we'll see that we're moving in IPMX into WAN and cloud applications. And with each step, we'll continue to see the boundaries of video and audio applications disappear, especially within the world of video that remains kind of trapped within the computer applications, that multimedia, that kind of streaming thing that we were talking about earlier. So we saw how those technologies emerged within kind of a separate world, right? I mean, when video became video and then also computer graphics, and then they kind of grew up separately, the computer and Pro AV world and broadcast drifted apart. And as a result of the separation, we barely recognize that the call we're on right now is fundamentally what we do when we make live productions for broadcast. Games are algorithmically generated, interactive, animated live productions with a goal and a score, right? There's really not much conceptual separation between video and broadcast and the video trapped in the computer, except for the separation caused by the two industries' technological histories and the intent of the content. So it may not seem too relevant to IPMX, but the common island of video that we depend on today, such as Zoom or Slack or Teams for that matter, and the troubles we have integrating them into Pro AV systems or even broadcast systems, really could be a thing of the past as these standards are ratified and as they become available to everyone. So going live from our phones with controlled latency to and from any application really should be an expectation and not an exceptional technical feat. And mashing up live media and digital signage tools and building them into new applications should also be straightforward with tools from any combination of vendors, much like it was before video split apart in the 80s. Now, I'm going to be like Barry White. I'm going to get a little bit real with you now. But not too real, but I know we're all technical here, but I want to point out something more on the personal level, that video, well, first I'll say that we are a storytelling species, right? So our ability to invent realities is extra special for humans. And it really sharing them is what enables our society to actually exist. It creates a sort of shared sense of purpose, right? And it makes it possible for us to cooperate with each other. So video combined with audio today has become the premier medium of our lifetimes. So knowing how to make it went really from something that only engineers could do and before the 1940s or in the 1940s to a question of literacy today. And having access to it went from a luxury to a cultural necessity. So in short, we are all making television now. We are all experiencing it and we are all learning from it. And because we are all migrating to a common infrastructure, which is IP networks, one robust and flexible standard for working with AV content can reduce confusion, simplify adoption, and also make it more accessible to everybody. And we'll start with Pro AV and broadcast. So as we continue to invent new applications for audio and video in our work and our lives, what will be the point really of the existing barriers, right? Why bother with that shadow wave? Why bother with separate standards for Pro AV and broadcast? Turning video into something more like a utility doesn't happen in a silo, of course. So whether we're talking about closed standards or standards between industries, right? So thanks to the common infrastructure we are sharing, we now have a clear opportunity, and we are privileged to be in the position to do the work of creating flexible, robust, and open standards designed to help low latency audio and video in any environment, designed to help people use it in any environment. And all of us as consumers and also as technology providers stand to be the winners of that reality. So together we have a chance to make video just video again. And IPMX really means video on your network. That's kind of our goal. So I'll end my presentation on the Joint Task Force on Network Media's Pro AV, or they're also called JTNM. I'll end on that roadmap, which aims help to create and which guides the progress of IPMX. You can see the work that has been completed as well as the work that's in progress and what's out there in the future. To those of you on the call today that are helping with that, thank you. I know we share a sense of purpose and determination that will get us to the finish line. And I really have zero doubt that we will get there. For those that have yet to join, please do. Any one of the members of AIMS, AMWA, VSF, or AES would be happy to share how. Your contribution to the effort will help your company prepare for open standards and for that portion of the wave as we get closer to that convergence point, and as well as improve, of course, the quality of and impact of the work we're doing as well. So that's why we need your help. So there are many ways you can help, as you can obviously see on the roadmap. And today you'll learn more about that, and you'll learn more about the exciting work we're doing. And I hope the upcoming presentations will be interesting and give you a sense of IPMX's power and progress. And so thank you for joining me on this trip through history and for exploring the waves of change we've seen over the years. I appreciate your kind attention, and I also look forward to your feedback or questions. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm glad you brought a lot of new material, and you should be proud of your artwork. I think it looks good.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, Wes, now you can correct the mistakes, because I'm sure you found some.
There's a couple. There's got to be a couple little things here and there. Anyhow, sure. Let's see. So right now we have the comments open. If anybody has any questions for Andrew, you can either type it in the chat window, or if you'd like, I can set it up so that we allow your video to come on. And then let's we've got about 3 minutes here. So if anybody has any comments or anything along those lines, please unmute. If you have a good story that you can tell in a minute, by all means.
Or we can chat in the room too. So
there you
go. Wes, I have a question.
Go right ahead.
And Andrew, if you could, one of the things that I've noted historically is that we've always had in the past major improvements in quality of audio, quality of video, quality of control, whatever the case might be, as we progressed from, say, for example, analog to component analog to serial digital to HD, etc. But where's the improvement in picture and sound quality with digital? Or do we simply go ahead and benefit from the ease of workflow? Are we at that point now where we've kind of soothed the eyes to the point of really there's not a gain in picture quality and sound quality as much as there is in ease of operation?
I think there's been quite large advancements in that area. I know SEMTI has been a part of a lot of studies on colorimetry, and in fact, I'm going to be really ignorant on this, and I'll yield to someone else that might know. But I do know also that there's a lot of companies studying sound and audible or auditory perception and visual perception, and figuring out how to use compression technology to increase overall perceptual quality. I know there's like 5 people on this call that know what those organizations are called, but
yep, that makes sense. One more quick question from Glenn Stillwell. Andrew, how do you see the meshing of the IT department and the broadcast department?
Well, I think that's one thing I'll say about that is that my observation is that the broadcasters or people that know video need to hold their head up higher than they are generally. And they need to appreciate that the real-time nature and the constraints that video have are the value, and knowing how to work and think like that is very valuable. And what I've seen too often, I think, is that we just feel like our jobs are taken from us. We feel like we're not valuable anymore, or we're not special anymore. And to be honest with you, we're really exceptional. We're not special, because like I say, everybody's doing video now, right? But what we do is hard, and the experience that we bring is valuable. And this is just the next tool. Like if you're, you just have to look at it like this is the next playground. This is the next set of tools. Those transition from analog meant you threw away a lot of your test equipment then and learned new techniques, with the digital world. And this is just that squared. And so I think that there's obviously a lot of cross learning to happen, but I think the exciting part is that when you bring two smart people in a room with two different perspectives, a lot of awesome stuff happens, and that's where the creativity can really take hold. And so I think that as professionals from the sort of AV industry and also the broadcast industry start to integrate more with IT, I look forward to to that creative mix. But I think that obviously there's going to be background that's going to make someone stronger in certain areas of that than others. So there's be a lot of cross learning. Hopefully I answered your question there.